I never thought that my life could fall apart in a matter of days. I used to live in absolute certainty that I had everything: a loving wife, a beautiful daughter, trustworthy friends, and a job I was proud of. Now, looking back, I see how blind I was, not seeing the obvious signs. But let's start over. That day started out as usual. I returned from my shift at the firehouse at 6 in the morning, tired after a difficult night call. We'd been fighting a warehouse fire for 3 hours, and I still smelled like smoke, despite the showers in the unit. April was already making breakfast in the kitchen, her blonde hair gathered and scrambled eggs sizzling on the stove. "Tough shift?" she asked without turning around. After so many years of marriage, she'd learned to tell from my footsteps how exhausting the night had been. Warehouse on Maple Street. The old owner saved money on wiring. I kissed her cheek and reached for the coffee pot. "Is Grace still asleep?" "Not anymore, Daddy," came a ringing voice, and a little whirlwind in pink unicorn pajamas flew into the kitchen. My 8-year-old daughter wrapped her arms around my waist, tucking her nose into my uniform jacket. "You smell like a campfire for marshmallows." I scooped her up in my arms, feeling the fatigue recede. Grace was my personal sunshine, her brown eyes always glowing with curiosity and joy. People often said she looked a lot like April, but I always saw her traits in her as well, especially her stubborn chin and her habit of wrinkling her nose when she didn't like something. "How is Mrs. Puckett?" April asked, arranging the scrambled eggs on plates. She worked at the family food supermarket at the checkout counter, and she and this regular customer always had their own topics of conversation. "Bought her usual pie set yesterday, and she was complaining about arthritis." April placed a plate in front of me. "My mom called this morning, wants to stop by this weekend." I tried to keep a neutral expression on my face. Maggie Bishop, my mother-in-law, never hid her disappointment with her daughter's choice. In her eyes, a firefighter wasn't good enough for her April. She dreamed of a doctor or a lawyer, and she got me, a simple guy from Texas who risked his life for an average paycheck. "Dad, tell me about the fire!" Grace was already sitting at the table, chattering her feet and smearing ketchup on her plate. I began to tell the story, omitting the most gruesome details. A firefighter's job is not only heroic rescues, but also long hours of training, equipment checks, and drills. Yesterday, Carson and I were the first to enter the burning building. Carson has been my best friend and partner for 12 years. He lives alone in a big house inherited from his parents, where we often gather as a team. "Is there soccer tonight?" April asked, gathering the dishes. She knew we traditionally gathered at Carson's on Wednesdays. "Yeah, the big game. Miles promised to bring his signature barbecue." I helped Grace tie the laces on her sneakers. She was already standing in the hallway with her backpack, ready for school. "Don't be too late," April pecked my cheek. "And say hi to the guys." I drove Grace to school, listening to her talk about the upcoming talent competition. She was going to sing a song from Cold Hearted, and had been practicing for a week in front of the mirror with a comb instead of a microphone. At a stoplight, we met Liam Foster, another colleague from our unit. He waved to us, driving his twins to the same school. After school, I stopped by the unit. Even though it was my day off, I like to keep up to date on things. Our station was an old brick building with a shabby red door and the famous pole that we go down on alarm. Inside it smelled of leather, metal, and coffee. Miles was witching on his car, an old '67 Ford Mustang that he was restoring for the 3rd year. "Brandon!" Captain Hendricks called out to me. "Come in for a minute!" In his office, we discussed the latest incident and filled out the necessary reports. I liked this part of the job a little less than the direct field trips, but I realized its importance. Each report could help prevent future tragedies. In the evening, I drove to Carson's house. His house, a 2-story house with a wide veranda and a 2-car garage, had become something of a refuge for our company. Here we could be ourselves, discuss our work, share our problems and joys. Miles was already working on the grill, and Liam was setting up the beer in the fridge. "How's Grace?" Carson asked, helping me chop vegetables for the salad. He was my daughter's godfather and adored her almost as much as I did. "Getting ready for the talent competition. This is the 3rd time April has restitched her princess costume." We settled down in front of the big TV where the match was being broadcast. I thought about how lucky I was to have friends and family. If only I had known that very soon everything would change. On the way back, I bought April her favorite strawberry-filled donuts. She was waiting for me, sitting in a chair with a book. Grace was already asleep, cuddled up with her stuffed unicorn. I kissed my wife, inhaling the familiar scent of her vanilla shampoo. "How was the match?" she asked, snuggling up to me. "Won. Miles almost burned down the barbecue while he was arguing with Liam about tactics." I noticed the first signs that something was wrong in early April. April had become distracted, checking her phone a lot and staying late after work. I put it down to fatigue. The supermarket was under renovation, and she had to work harder. But now I realized that's when things started to change. That day, I came back from my 24-hour shift particularly exhausted. We had put out a fire in an apartment building and rescued a family with 2 children. The younger girl was about Grace's age, and I couldn't get her frightened face out of my mind. After a call like that, you especially appreciate your home and family. I decided to stop by April's supermarket to buy something for dinner and pick her up from work. Family Food was a 10-minute drive from our house, a typical suburban store with a cracked sign and automatic doors that squeaked forever. As I parked my pickup truck, I noticed an unfamiliar black late-model BMW. Such cars were rare in our neighborhood. Inside the store, familiar music from the 80s was playing, and I smelled fresh baked goods from the deli. I headed toward the cash register, but April wasn't in her usual spot. Susan, her coworker at the next register, nodded toward the service entrance. "She's in there talking to some man," said an old acquaintance. Something in her tone made me wary. I walked through the service hallway and heard voices around the corner. April spoke softly, almost a whisper. "You shouldn't come here. I told you to." "I have the right." The man's voice was low, husky. 8 years, April. 8 goddamn years." I stepped out from around the corner. April stood leaning against the wall, her face pale. Next to her was a tall man in an expensive suit, with a tattoo peeking out from under his shirt collar. He turned toward me and I saw a scar crossing his left eyebrow. "Ah, that must be Brandon," he smiled. But it was a smile. "Dexter Thornton. Nice to meet you." April twitched as if from a blow. "Brendan, we're just old friends," Dexter finished for her. "Very old." Something about his demeanor, the way he looked at my wife, made me instinctively reject him. In my years as a firefighter, I'd learned to trust my instincts. "April, are you ready to go home?" I tried to speak calmly, even though everything inside clenched with inexplicable anxiety. "Yeah, sure." She grabbed her bag, avoiding looking me in the eye. "Bye, Dexter." "See you later." He said it like a promise, not a goodbye. On the drive home, April was silent, staring out the window. Her fingers nervously rubbed the strap of her bag. "Who is he?" I tried to keep my voice neutral. "Really an old acquaintance. We met in college. I didn't know he was in town." Something in her voice told me she wasn't telling me the truth, but I didn't push it. We'd always trusted each other, and I trusted that if it was important, she'd tell me. Grace met us at home, having spent the day with Maggie. My mother-in-law was sitting in the living room leafing through a magazine, and for some reason her presence seemed particularly out of place to me. "April, honey, you look tired." Maggie set the magazine aside. "Why don't you stay at my place this weekend? Take a break from everything." I noticed the strange look they exchanged. It was as if there was some secret between them that was beyond my reach. That evening, after putting Grace to bed, I went down to the kitchen for a drink of water and heard April talking on the phone. She was standing on the back porch, thinking I was already in bed. "No, not now. I can't just... Yes, I understand, but it takes time." The next few days passed in a strange tension. April started staying late at work more often. Maggie showed up at our house almost every day, supposedly to help with Grace. And then I saw him in the park where my daughter usually walked after school. Dexter was sitting on a bench near the playground, as if by chance. He was wearing jeans and a t-shirt, looking almost normal if it weren't for the expensive watch and the same tenacious gaze. Grace was swinging on a swing, and he was watching her with some strange mixture of longing and greed in his gaze. I walked over to him. "What are you doing here?" This is a public place. He didn't even turn to me. That's a beautiful girl, very much like her mother. There was something in his voice that made my hands involuntarily clench into fists, but I couldn't make a scene in front of my daughter. Stay away from my family, I said quietly. Now he looked at me, and something akin to pity flashed in his gaze. Your family? Are you so sure of that? In the evening, I tried to talk to April. She was setting the table, arranging the plates with a kind of mechanical precision. He's watching Grace. The plate slipped from her hands and shattered on the floor. April stared at the shards as if she didn't understand what had happened. What did he say to you? Her voice shook. Enough for me to start asking questions. I helped her pick up the shards. What's going on, April? Nothing. She straightened up. He's just trying to ruin our lives. Don't let him. But something had already snapped. A crack had appeared in our home so cozy and secure. I could feel it in waking up at night and hearing April crying in the bathroom. Saw it in the way she flinched when the phone rang. I could feel it in the worried looks she threw at Grace. I was getting distracted at work. After one of the calls, Carson took me aside. What's going on with you? You're not yourself. I didn't know what to say, how to explain the vague premonition of trouble, how to describe something that hadn't happened yet, but was already poisoning every day. And then the presents came. First, an expensive doll for Grace, from a secret admirer. Then a bracelet for April, which she promptly threw away. It was like he was trying to buy his way into our lives, and I felt helpless to this intrusion. Maggie seemed to be the only one who approved of his appearance. He's a successful businessman, she said. Just wants to make a relationship. But what kind of relationship with my wife, with my daughter? The questions multiplied, but there were no answers. I found the letters by accident. I was sorting through old boxes in the attic. April had asked me to make room for Christmas decorations, even though the holidays were far away. Among the dusty scrapbooks and Grace's old toys lay a shabby shoebox. Inside was a stack of letters tied with faded ribbon, letters from prison. The handwriting was sprawling, aggressive. Dexter wrote them 8 years ago when he was serving time for armed robbery. I read them sitting on the dusty attic floor and felt reality slipping through my fingers. Sweetheart, I'm counting the days until I'm released. Thinking of you and our baby. Take care of our baby girl. One day I'll come back and everything will be as it was before. Don't let him take my place. Grace is my daughter and no fireman is going to change that. The front door slammed downstairs. I heard April calling my name, the steps creaking beneath her footsteps. The letters stung my hands. Brandon? Are you upstairs? I got groceries for... She froze in the opening of the attic hatch, saw the box, the letters in my hands. Her face turned white as chalk. How long were you going to keep quiet? My voice sounded foreign, hoarse. April sank down on the old chest as if her legs refused to hold her up. I wanted to tell. So many times I've wanted to... 8 years, April. 8 years I raised someone else's child. She's yours. She pitched forward. You're her father. You raised her, loved her. What about him? Is he her biological father? Is that why he's following her around the park? April covered her face with her hands. Her shoulders shook. We dated in college. He was older, seemed so dangerous and attractive. When he was arrested, I was 2 months pregnant. My mom advised me to get an abortion, but I couldn't. What about me? Was I just a convenient substitute? Bitterness overwhelmed me. No, I loved you, really loved you. You were everything I could have dreamed of. Kind, reliable, but not good enough to hear the truth. The house was unusually quiet. Usually at this time, Grace was watching cartoons or playing in her room. Today she was at her friend's house, and that silence was pressing on her eardrums. Did he threaten you? April shook her head. No, he just showed up and said he wanted to be a part of her life. He's got money now, connections. And what did you say? That Grace already has a father. I stared at a picture that had fallen out of one of the letters. A young April in a summer dress, Dexter next to her, still without a scar. They looked happy, carefree. This was before everything. Before the arrest, before me, before Grace. Did Mom know? Yes. Her voice was barely audible. She never approved of our marriage. Thought I should have waited for Dexter. A lot of things were becoming clear now. Maggie's coldness, her constant hints that I wasn't providing enough for the family, her sudden activity in recent weeks. I'm leaving. April stood up. I need some time to think. Mom will take me in. And Grace? She'll stay with you. Until we figure things out. I watched her walk down the stairs. I heard her packing. I heard her calling her mother. It was like a blur. Reality was falling apart and I couldn't hold on to it. When the front door closed behind April, I sat in silence for a long time. Then I called Carson. Come over, he said after listening. Come over right now. Everyone was gathered at his house. Carson, Miles, Liam. They listened in silence, not interrupting. Then Miles opened his whiskey. What are you going to do? Carson asked. Protect my daughter, I looked at them. Because she's my daughter, no matter what the DNA tests say or the letters from prison. We're with you. Liam put his hand on my shoulder. No matter what happens. When I got home, I found Grace in the living room. She was sitting on the couch, hugging her knees. Where's Mommy? How do you explain to an 8-year-old that her world is falling apart? How do you tell her that all these years had been built on lies? Mommy's staying at Grandma's for a while. I sat down next to her. She needs some things to sort out. Is it about that man? Her voice shook. The one who came to the park? I froze. Have you talked to him? No, but he always looks at me weird. And Grandma said he's a good man I should get to know better. Rage rose up in me in a hot wave. Maggie, of course. She was preparing the ground, manipulating even her own granddaughter. Listen to me. I took my daughter's hands in mine. You hear me, you must never talk to him. If he tries to come near you, call for help right away. I'm afraid, she whispered. Why did it get so bad? I pulled her to me, feeling her shoulders shake. My baby, my daughter, despite the letters, despite the lies, despite the betrayal. It's going to be okay, I said, stroking her hair. Daddy won't let anyone hurt you. The days stretched on in a strange, distorted succession. I tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy for Grace, but each morning was difficult. Making breakfast, braiding her pigtails, driving her to school. The simple acts that had once been filled with love were now filled with bitterness and doubt. At work, I was sinking into the routine like a life preserver. Equipment checks, drills, calls all required total concentration and left no room for thought. After a particularly heavy fire in the machine shop, Captain Hendricks pulled me aside. Holloway, you're taking too many risks. This isn't like you. I stood before him, still in my charred uniform, feeling the burn on my forearm searing. Indeed, I had thrown myself into the fire without my usual caution, as if trying to prove something to myself. Personal problems shouldn't affect work, his voice softened. Take a couple days off. But home was the worst. The empty half of the closet screamed April's absence. Her toothbrush, her hand cream, her favorite mug, every little thing reminded me of the betrayal. I removed all the pictures of the three of us, but I left one snapshot. Grace at 3 years old, on my shoulders, laughing with her head tilted back. My daughter. Always has been and always will be mine. In the evening after school, Grace sat at the kitchen table doing her math homework. I was making dinner, macaroni and cheese, her favorite meal. Daddy, why does Sarah's daddy live in another city and only comes on weekends? The question caught me off guard. All families have their own circumstances, sunshine. Is Mommy coming back? I turned my back to the stove, trying to deal with the lump in my throat. I don't know. Right now, Mom needs time. And that man? Does he really want to take me away? Who told you that? Grandma called. Said he's my real dad and really wants to be friends with me. Rage flooded me with such force that I had to take a deep breath before I turned to my daughter. Maggie was overstepping her bounds. Listen to me carefully. I sat down next to Grace. A real father isn't someone who just shows up in your life. A real dad is someone who loves you every day, who reads you bedtime stories, Who knows which Band-Aid you like when you hurt yourself and how to braid your pigtails properly? She nodded, rubbing her pencil. I know, Daddy. I don't want another daddy. That night, I sat in her room for a long time, listening to the steady breathing of my sleeping daughter. On the wall hung pictures of our family, drawn by a child's hand. 3 figures holding hands. Now one of them was gone, leaving behind a void. My phone vibrated, a message from April. Can I see Grace tomorrow? I stared at the screen, not knowing what to say. Part of me wanted to say no, to punish her for lying, but that wouldn't be fair to Grace. At 4, after school, not at your mom's. We met at a coffee shop near the house. April looked gaunt. Grace rushed over to her and hugged her. I looked at them and saw how similar they were, the same tilt of the head, the same gestures. And somewhere in the back of my mind, the pain of realizing that there was nothing of me in Grace again. Not a single trait. How are you? April asked when Grace stepped back to pick out a brownie. How do you think? I tried to speak softly, even though everything was boiling inside. Your mother is calling our daughter and telling her about her real father. April went pale. I didn't know. I swear I forbade her. How did you forbid Dexter from going near Grace? I saw his car outside the school. He's not going to hurt her. How can you be so sure? Do you know what he's been in jail for? All 8 years? She looked away. That was a long time ago. He's changed. People don't change, April, especially people like him. That evening, I called Carson. His house had become a safe haven for me, a place where I could talk about anything without fear of judgment. I don't know what to do. Every time I look at her, I see his features, and I hate myself for it. She's your daughter, Carson said confidently. 8 years is no joke. You raised her. You love her. What does it matter whose blood runs in her veins? What if he tries to take her away, legally? We have friends on the police force. We can run him through. That night, I dreamed of Grace. She was standing on the playground and darkness was thickening around her. I tried to run to her, but my legs felt like they were stuck in molasses. And out of the darkness, Dexter would appear, holding his hands out to her. They called me the ghost at work. I did everything mechanically, moved like a robot, spoke only when necessary. Even on calls, I was on autopilot, precise, but without the spark that used to make me one of the best in the unit. Captain Hendricks frowned more and more often, looking in my direction. That day, we were fighting a fire in an old warehouse. The smoke was thick, black, clogged even under my mask. I was walking along the wall, checking the rooms, when I heard a cracking sound. A beam overhead began to give way. Holloway, get out now! The captain's voice on the radio, but I hesitated. A second, 2. Like something inside me wanted to see if I really still wanted to live. Carson pulled me out by the scruff of my neck like a misbehaving puppy. Are you crazy? He yelled afterward as we sat by the car. You have a daughter at home. Daughter, a word that now hurt. Every night I'd come home and Grace would run to meet me and hug me, and I'd feel like the biggest liar in the world, because part of me, that dark, evil part, now saw her as someone else's traits. That evening I found Maggie at home. She was sitting in the kitchen like a hostess, making tea for April's mug. What are you doing here? Brought Grace back from tutoring. She didn't even turn around. Someone has to take care of the kid while you play hero. Where is she? In her room. Dexter gave her a present. I froze. What? A new tablet, very generous of him. I took off up the stairs. Grace was indeed sitting on the bed with a brand new iPad. Grandma said it was from a friend. She looked up at me. But I know it's from him. I don't want to. I took the tablet. My hands were shaking with rage. Dad, I really didn't ask for it. He left it to Grandma and she... I know, Sunshine. I pulled her to me. It's not your fault. I reached down, holding the clipboard like a poisonous snake. Maggie was still in the kitchen. No more presents, no more secret messages, no visits without my knowledge. You can't forbid him from seeing his daughter. She's not his daughter. Genetics says otherwise. Maggie pressed her lips together. Dexter has rights. Rights? I tossed the clipboard onto the table. What rights does a man who's been in prison for 8 years have? Who didn't even know she existed until you told me? She went pale. How did you? April told me. About how you found him, how you reported Grace. Why, Maggie? To get back at me? Or to completely ruin your own daughter's life? He's changed. Her voice shook. He has money, connections. He can give Grace everything you can't even dream of. Get out of my house, April called in the evening. Her voice tired, lost. I heard about the tablet. I'm sorry. I'll talk to my mom. It doesn't matter anymore. I looked out the window where dusk was thickening. But we need to decide what to do next. He wants to see her, officially. No. Brandon. I said no. I've been her father for 8 years. I changed her diapers, nursed her broken knees, read her bedtime stories. And him? He was in prison for armed robbery. What else do we know about him? Silence in the receiver. Then a quiet sob. I've ruined everything, haven't I? I didn't answer. What can I say? Yes, you did. Ruined everything I believed in. Stole my right to be a father to my daughter. I didn't sleep again that night. Sitting in the living room, going through old photographs. Here's Grace taking her first steps, holding on to my fingers. Here's her first day of school. White bows, new backpack, proud smile. Here we are at the beach. She's on my shoulders, squealing with delight as I step into the waves. 8 years of memories. 8 years of love. Can some DNA test cross that out? My phone vibrates. An unfamiliar number. She's my daughter. Dexter's voice, husky with a note of menace. You can fight back, but the law is on my side. The law? I grinned. The same law you broke? The one you did 8 years in prison for? People change. No, people like you don't change, and I'm not letting you anywhere near Grace. We'll see about that. There was steel in his voice. I have money, lawyers. What do you have besides a firefighter's paycheck? I pressed the rebound. My hands were shaking. One thought pulsed in my head. Protect her. Keep her safe. Keep her life from being ruined. The next day, I took Grace with me to the station. She loved being there. Everyone knew her, spoiled her. Liam let her sit in the cab of the fire truck. Miles showed her how the radio worked. Dad, she rubbed the sleeve of my uniform. Can we go away? Far, far away where no one will find us? My heart clenched. Is that what you want? I want things to be like they used to be. When Mom was home and there wasn't that scary uncle and Grandma didn't say bad things. I pulled her against me, feeling her shoulders shake. My little girl. She shouldn't have to go through this. Shouldn't be afraid, hiding, running away. It'll be okay, I lied, stroking her head. Daddy will fix it. But I didn't know how. For the first time in my life, I didn't know what to do. And that helplessness was killing me inside. Everything changed that Tuesday. I had just returned from a 24-hour shift, a heavy shift, 3 trips in a row. The last one was especially difficult. An apartment building was on fire, and I had to evacuate a whole family through a 3rd-floor window. I could still smell the smoke in my hair when Grace's school phone rang. Mr. Holloway? There's been an incident. Dexter had tried to pick her up after school. He introduced himself as her father, showed her some papers. Luckily, the teacher knew me personally. I'd taught fire safety classes in the classroom a few times. She called security. I raced to the school in 12 minutes, breaking every conceivable traffic law. Grace sat in the principal's office, pale, with reddened eyes. Daddy! She rushed toward me, clawing at me like a little koala. He said he'd take me to his place. The principal called the police, but Dexter had already left. He had some paperwork. The older woman handed me a copy. About child rights. The papers looked official. Seals, signatures, all the right stuff. He'd been preparing, gathering evidence. And here I thought his ostensible friendliness was genuine. At home, the first thing I did was call April. Did you know? Did you know he was going to do this? No! Her voice shook. I swear he didn't say, God, is Grace okay? Scared, confused. How else can a child a stranger tried to steal from her feel? He's not a stranger, he's her. Don't even finish that sentence. I felt a vein throbbing on my temple. Biological affinity doesn't give him any rights. Grace didn't leave my side all evening, sitting next to me while I cooked dinner, following my lead when I put the dishes away. Even went to bed in my room, clinging to my arm. "What if he comes at night?" she whispered in the dark. "He won't come." I hugged her tighter. "Daddy won't let anyone take you away." But inside, everything was boiling with helplessness. How do you protect a child from a man who has legal rights to her, who could hire the best lawyers, use his connections and money? Maggie called in the morning. "You're only making things worse," she began without greeting. "Dexter wants to settle this peacefully." Peacefully? He tried to kidnap a kid from school. He's her father. He has the right to— Listen to me carefully. I tried to speak calmly, even though everything inside was seething. "If you ever help him near Grace again, I will file a report against you as an accessory to kidnapping. Do you understand me?" There was a heavy silence. Then Maggie snapped, "You're going to regret this." At work, I told Carson everything. He listened, frowning harder and harder. "I have a friend on the police force," he finally said. "Could run him through the database. I doubt armed robbery was his only crime." By evening, we had information. Dexter Thornton, 3 priors for assault, suspected racketeering, ties to a local gang. 8 years he got on a plea deal. Could have been more. "Here's your weapon." Carson put the folder on the table. "No court would give a man like that the right to a child." I looked at the documents and felt bitter. This wasn't how I wanted to protect my daughter. Not through the courts and the police, not through a sordid past and threats. But there was no choice. That evening, after putting Grace to bed, I was sitting in the living room when the doorbell rang. April stood on the threshold. "Can I come in?" She looked tired. She walked through the house and stopped in the middle of the living room, looking at the walls where our family pictures used to hang. "I left my mom," she said quietly. "I can't listen to her defend him anymore." "And you? Do you still believe he's changed?" April shook her head. "I was such a fool. Thought maybe Grace needed a real father." "A real one?" I felt something shiver inside. "And what have I been all these years?" "I'm sorry," she cried. "I ruined everything, didn't I? All those years. You were the best father anyone could dream of. And I looked at her and felt nothing. No anger, no pain, just tiredness. It was as if all emotion had burned out, leaving behind a void. "Where are you now?" "Got a room. Not far from here." She wiped her eyes. Can I see Grace?" "She's asleep. And after today, she needs time to recover." April nodded. She stood there for a moment, as if she wanted to add something, then she left silently. I sat in the dark living room, listening to the clock ticking and trying to figure out when my life had gone down the drain. My phone vibrated, a message from an unfamiliar number. "This is just the beginning. I'm taking her anyway." I erased the message, but the words seemed imprinted under my eyelids. I went upstairs and checked on Grace. She was asleep, cuddled up against a stuffed unicorn. Her face seemed especially defenseless in the moonlight from the window. I went back down to the living room and got a gun out of the safe. I never thought I'd have to use it. I bought it for home defense, like many in our neighborhood. Now I checked the magazine, cleaned it. If Dexter thinks he can just come and get my daughter— I didn't sleep that night. Sat in my chair, looking out the street through the window and thinking about how quickly normal life can fall apart, and how far I'd go to protect my child. I started noticing his car everywhere. A black BMW would show up outside the fire station, outside the supermarket where April worked, or just driving by our house. Dexter wasn't hiding. On the contrary, he wanted me to know he was watching. I was doing the best I could at work. I took a week off from school, but then I came back because I couldn't bear to stay home. Every room reminded me of April, of our old life. Even the smell of her perfume still lingered on my pillow. "You've lost weight," Miles remarked as we checked out the equipment. "And your eyes are like a hunted animal." I didn't say anything. What's there to say? That I hardly ever sleep? That every rustle makes me grab my gun? That I'm afraid of coming home one day and finding Grace's room empty? We had a tough call that day. A chemical warehouse on fire. Acrid smoke. Explosive atmosphere. I was on automatic, but even through the protective mask, I could feel the tension in my throat. "Holloway!" shouted the captain. "Is your sector clear?" I nodded, wiping the sweat from my forehead. The sweat mixed with soot, leaving black stains on my skin. Suddenly, my phone vibrated in my pocket. A message from Grace. She was at a friend's house after school. "Dad, there's this man here. He's standing at the gate." I rushed to the car without even taking off my uniform. Carson ran after me. "I'm coming with you." It took us 10 minutes to get there. Dexter was there, standing by his BMW as if nothing had happened. When he saw us, he waved at us like we were old friends. "Here comes Fireman Daddy," he grinned. "Decided to check on your daughter?" "My daughter." I stepped toward him. "Get out of here." "Our daughter." He pulled out a cigarette, lighting it. "You know, it's funny. You played family for 8 years while I sat around. But now it's my turn. If you go near her one more time." "Then what?" He exhaled smoke in my face. "You're going to hit me? Go ahead. I'm just waiting for an excuse to file a report on you. Aggressive stepfather threatening biological father." Carson put a hand on my shoulder, holding me back, and Dexter continued, as if savoring the moment. "I have money, connections, lawyers. What do you have? A fireman's salary and a house on credit? What will you be able to provide for the girl?" "Love." I looked him in the eye. "Something you've never had and never will have." Something flashed in his gaze. Anger? Resentment? But he quickly pulled himself together. "Love," he grinned. "We'll see what the judge says. I've got the DNA test, the paperwork." "All you have is a felon's past," Carson interjected. "You think the court's going to give the baby to an ex-con?" Dexter dropped the cigarette butt, crushed it with the toe of his expensive shoe. "We'll see." He got into the car. "Say hi to April. By the way, she looks really cute in her cashier's uniform." The implication was clear. He was watching her, too. I rushed to the car, but Carson held me back. The BMW moved smoothly out of the driveway. "He's provoking you on purpose," Carson said. "Don't give in." I took Grace away from her friend. She was pale, scared. "He said he was going to pick me up soon," she whispered in the car. "That he had a big house and a dog." "That's not going to happen." I squeezed the steering wheel this way and that. "Never." At home, I called April. She was crying into the phone. "He came to the store, talked, saying that things could go back to the way they were, that he had money, that we could—" "And what did you say?" A pause. Then quietly, "That he was 8 years too late, that Grace already had a father." I closed my eyes. For the first time in a long time, I felt something resembling gratitude toward her. I was checking the locks at night when I heard a noise in the yard. I looked out, and there was no one there. There was an envelope on the porch. Inside were pictures, me and Grace in the park, April at the supermarket. It was like we were all in the crosshairs. I crumpled the pictures, but my hands were shaking. He played with us like a cat and mouse, showed he could get us at any moment. In the morning, Liam called. "Did you see the news? Your Dexter. He's being linked to the arson of a rival business, 2 years ago." I turned on the TV. It was a news report on an old case. Dexter was being held as a suspect, but there wasn't enough evidence. "That's it," I told Carson later. "That's why he's in such a hurry to get Grace. If he gets arrested again—" "We need to act fast." Carson was serious. "I have a plan." We gathered at his house that evening. Me, Carson, Miles, Liam. We discussed the options. The plan was risky, but we saw no other option. "He won't stop," I said, looking at my friends. "And I can't lose my daughter. I can't let him ruin her life." "We won't let him." Miles put a hand on my shoulder. "You and me." I looked at these people, my friends, my second family, and felt the crushing loneliness of the last few weeks recede. No matter what happened next, I wasn't alone. At home, Grace was waiting for me with a drawing. Our house, me in my firefighter's uniform, her by my side. No April, no Dexter, just the two of us. "This is our fortress," she said seriously. "No one can beat us." I hugged her, feeling my eyes sting. My girl, my daughter. For her sake, I was willing to do anything. That night, I sat in the living room for a long time, staring at my phone. Dexter was lurking, but it was the calm before the storm. He was cooking something. I could feel it in every fiber of my being. The logs were crackling in the fireplace. I threw the pictures into the fire, watched them blacken and curl. Tomorrow we'll go ahead with the plan, and God help us. That night we gathered at Carson's house to formulate a plan. His living room, usually cozy and warm, seemed like a military headquarters. Carson had laid out on the table a detailed plan of his house, an old blueprint he'd kept since he'd bought it. We sat in his living room, me, Miles, Liam, and the owner himself. Empty coffee cups and an ashtray of cigarette butts told us that the discussion had been going on for hours. Look, Carson circled key points with a red marker. Here and here are blind spots. Dexter must have studied the outside of the house, but he only knows the inside layout roughly. That's our advantage. Miles pulled out a folder of surveillance photos. Over the past 2 weeks, we've gathered enough information on Dexter's routines. Every Tuesday and Thursday, his black BMW showed up in the neighborhood, always with 2 escorts in a gray Ford. Those 2 right there. Miles pointed to the pictures. Small-time bipeds from the docks, Jimmy Rat Parker and Ray Donovan, specialize in debtor intimidation. Nothing serious, so he doesn't have a real gang. Or, he doesn't want to shine the spotlight on the core people, Liam remarked, tapping his fingers on the table. His military experience made him consider all options. No, I shook my head. He's overconfident, thinks 4 firefighters can be intimidated by a couple street thugs. A plan began to emerge gradually. Carson offered the basics. Use a traditional soccer night as bait. But the details required careful thought. 1. Liam pulled out his notebook. Change the furniture arrangement. We'll move the couch to the far wall, create a hiding place with a view of the front door. We'll arrange the chairs to block the direct path to the stairs. Lighting. Miles picked up on that. We'll install additional lamps here and here. Directional light blinds the incoming, gives the defenses an advantage. I can get professional spotlights. Let's tell the neighbors we're getting ready for a party. Carson pointed to the second floor plan. Liam will take position upstairs. The whole first floor is shot from here. Miles is behind the bar. He'll have cover and a view of the side entrance. I'll be in the office. There's a secret door to the garage. And I'll be the bait. I looked around at my friends. The key is not to let him suspect a trap. It has to look natural. We spent the next 2 hours practicing every detail. Liam drew a movement diagram, taking into account all possible entry points. Miles checked the weapons. Everyone had a gun, but we were hoping to avoid shooting. Now communications. Carson pulled out 4 radio transmitters. Operate on a secure frequency. Small, discreet, signals stable. What if he comes in more than one? Miles asked. He'll come with those 2, I was sure. He likes theatrical effects. He'll want to control everything himself. We devised a system of signals. 3 flicks of a switch. Ready number 1. The sound of breaking glass is the start of the operation. A distinctive bang on the wall. Support required. Now for the hard part. Carson looked at me. Grace and April should be far away. I nodded. I'll talk to April. She'll pick Grace up after school, take her to the mall on the other side of town. Movie, pizza place. The whole evening is busy. I'll put a beacon on their car. Miles was serious. And I'll have a couple guys watch from a distance, just in case. The next week was spent preparing. We did everything gradually so as not to arouse suspicion. Carson casually told the neighbors about the upcoming match. I discussed plans loudly on the phone in places where I knew Dexter's men could hear me. Liam installed hidden cameras around the perimeter of the house. Miles had reinforced the windows with special tape not bulletproof, but capable of delaying a gunshot. Carson double-checked every detail. Body armor? I'd asked the day before. Under the shirts, Carson nodded. Lightweight, inconspicuous. Won't save you from a direct hit, but they increase your chance of survival. We did 3 drills. We practiced every move, every scenario. What to do if Dexter comes through the front door, what to do if he tries to break through the garage, how to protect each other, how to retreat if things don't go according to plan. That last night, I sat at Grace's house, listening to her breathing in her sleep. There was a drawing on the table, her and her mom at the movies, happy smiles. Tomorrow they would indeed go to the movies, unaware that our fate would be decided at that time. "It's gonna be okay, sunshine," I whispered, adjusting the blanket. "Daddy will fix everything." In the morning, I drove her to school as usual, kissed her goodbye, told her that her mom would pick her up in the evening. She waved goodbye and ran off to her friends, and I stood there, memorizing the moment. Because if anything went wrong... "Ready?" Carson asked when I arrived at his place in the afternoon. I checked my gun, habitually loading a round into the chamber. 8 years in the fire department had taught me how to protect people. Today, I'd protect my family. Time to end this story. Now all that was left to do was wait, and hope the price of victory wasn't too high. Carson's house always smelled of coffee and wood. He liked to work with wood in his spare time, making picture frames, shelves, toys for his co-workers' children. That night we gathered there to watch soccer, as we had done hundreds of times before. Only now I had my gun in the locker under the TV, and Carson had his police-issue weapon in its holster. Grace was at April's, the first time I'd let them spend the evening together in a long time, away from what was about to happen. "He'll bite," Miles said, opening a beer. "His men have been watching the house for 3 days now." I nodded. We knew Dexter would find out about our meeting. Knew he wouldn't miss a chance to catch me without Grace. All we had to do was wait. There was a game on the TV, but no one was keeping track of the score. Liam tapped his fingers nervously on the arm of his chair. Carson was wiping the glasses, a habit from his time in the service when he was prepping for surgery. I looked at the pictures on the walls, our firefighting team, outings together, birthdays. Here's Grace on Carson's shoulders at last year's picnic. Here we are, all soot-covered after a complicated fire. So many memories, so many. The sound of breaking glass interrupted my thoughts. Miles reacted first, pushing me behind the couch a second before the first bullet whizzed through the air where I'd just stood. "Fireman!" Dexter's voice boomed through the house. "Come out to talk." Carson was already at the back door, holding his gun at the ready. Liam ducked down and moved toward the kitchen. I drew my weapon, feeling the cold steel sink into my palm. "What's to talk about?" I shouted, moving behind the chair. "About how you tried to steal my daughter?" "Yours?" Dexter's laugh was scary. "You stole my family. 8 years I rotted in jail while you played daddy." A new shot rang out. I clenched my teeth, holding back the rage. "Now listen to me," Dexter continued. "I'm going to take her anyway, and April too. We're going to be a real family." "A real one?" I rolled over behind the other chair, trying to time his stance. "You don't even know what a nightmare Grace has. What porridge she likes for breakfast. What a bedtime story she asks for before bed." "I'll learn." Out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement one of Dexter's men was trying to come in through the kitchen. A shot rang out. Liam didn't miss. A cry of pain was heard. "Surrender, Dexter!" Carson's voice sounded confident. "The cops are on their way." "Cops?" That awful laugh again. "I have my own police force, and my own laws." A new line of gunfire. Bullets crumbled furniture, shattered pictures on the walls. Shards of glass fell like rain. I remembered Grace's eyes when she asked about that man, her fear, her tears. 8 years of love versus 8 years of prison anger. You know what she said? I moved slowly along the wall. When she found out about you, said she didn't want another daddy, that her daddy was me. A roar of rage and Dexter leapt out of his hiding place. I caught the madness in his eyes a second before he pulled the trigger. The sound of the gunshot merged with Miles's scream. A sharp pain pierced my shoulder. The bullet had gone through and through. But I fired back, and this time I didn't miss. Dexter fell, holding his stomach. His gun fell to the side. In the silence that followed the shots, the only sounds heard were heavy breathing and the distant wail of police sirens. "You can't hold her anyway. She's my blood. Blood!" I pointed the gun at him. "Blood means nothing. It only means love." Miles was already calling an ambulance. Liam had a gun on the second wounded man. Carson was checking the perimeter. "You lost," I said to Dexter. "You can sue, you can threaten, but you'll never get her. Because you're not a father. You're just a man with the right DNA." The police burst into the house a minute later. Everything happened like a blur: the depositions, the reports, the medics treating my shoulder. Someone said they found drugs and unregistered weapons on Dexter, that his partner in crime was ready to testify. April came rushing in an hour later, with a crying Grace in her arms. "Daddy!" My little girl rushed to me, ignoring the bandage. "I was so scared." I cradled her in my healthy arm, breathing in the familiar scent of baby shampoo. "It's okay, sunshine. It's over." April stood back, biting her lip, then said quietly, "I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything. I was such a fool." I stared at Carson's trashed house, at the bullet marks on the walls, at the shards of our old life. So much destroyed, so much lost. But the most important thing I'd saved. My daughter was safe. And no DNA test, no paperwork could change the way I felt for this little girl who held me so tightly. "Let's go home," I said, getting up. "It's time for bed." "Are you going to tell a story?" Grace wiped away the last of her tears. "Sure, as always." Dexter hadn't just been arrested for the shooting. Old cases resurfaced: arson, extortion, drugs. This time, he was looking at a lot more time. The trial was scheduled for a month later, and all that time I lived on pins and needles, waking up at every rustle. I got a hero's welcome at the firehouse. Captain Hendricks personally came home to discuss my return to duty. Carson insisted that Grace and I stay with him until the fuss died down. His house still bore the marks of the shooting: bullet holes in the walls, broken photographs. But he just brushed it off. "I've been meaning to redecorate for a long time." April came by every day, tentative at first, as if afraid of being chased away. Then she got bolder, cooking dinner, helping Grace with her homework, trying to rebuild what she'd destroyed. "I've filed for divorce," she said one evening as we sat on the veranda. Grace was already asleep upstairs. I want you to get full custody." I was silent, staring at the sunset. For so many years, I'd lived someone else's life without knowing it. And now that the truth was out, it turned out that this was my real life. "Mom doesn't call anymore." April rubbed the sleeve of her sweater. "Says I betrayed the family, that Dexter could have provided a future for us." "The future isn't in money," I turned to her. "It's in love. In braided pigtails, in bedtime stories, in a Band-Aid on a broken knee." She cried quietly, without hysteria. And I thought about how strangely life works. Sometimes you have to lose everything to realize what's really important. A week later, we came home. Grace ran to her room first thing, checking out her toys. I slowly walked around the house, touching familiar things. This is where we were happy. This is where everything fell apart. And this was where we were meant to start over. Miles and Liam helped install a new security system. Cameras, motion sensors, just like in the fortress. "Overkill," Carson said, "but it's better this way." That evening, after putting Grace to bed, I sat in her room, listening to her steady breathing. On the wall hung her new drawing. Our house looking like a castle, with lots of people around it. "This is our family," she explained in the afternoon. "You, me, Mom, Uncle Carson, Uncle Miles, Uncle Liam." The next day, April brought in the divorce papers. Sat down at the kitchen table where we'd had breakfast together so many times. "I still love you," she said quietly, "but I don't deserve." "It's not about who deserves what." I looked at her trembling hands. "It's about what's right for Grace." She nodded, hiding her tears. Can I come over? Help with homework? Make dinner?" "You're her mother. That's not going to change." In the evening, I took Grace to the park, our special place where we'd been walking since she learned to walk. She swung on the swing and I watched the sun play in her hair. "Daddy!" She jumped off the swing, running up to me. "Is it true that love is stronger than anything else in the world?" "True," I hugged her. "Stronger than blood, stronger than money, stronger than any paperwork." "And stronger than bullets?" "Much stronger." We stood there in the middle of the fall park, and I thought about the many battles ahead. There would be courts, papers, more attempts to destroy our lives. But right now, in this moment, nothing mattered except the little girl in my arms. my daughter. Not by DNA test, but by love, and that made her even more mine.